Welcome back, everyone. Today we're going deep on the life of St. Francis of Assisi.
A figure I'm sure you're quite familiar with.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And for this deep dive, we've got St. Bonaventure's biography of him, which is kind of a classic for a reason.
It really is. It was written just a few years after Francis's death, and it gives us so much more than a timeline. It's really a look into the heart of a man who truly lived the gospel.
Yeah, and to really get that, see how deep his transformation was, we kind of have to go back to the beginning. His early life in Assisi. Now, we all know that he embraced poverty, but he wasn't born into it.
Right.
He was actually the son of like a wealthy cloth merchant.
Yeah, a very comfortable upbringing. Even a privileged one, you could say.
Yeah.
And that contrast is what makes his choices later so extraordinary. You can imagine young Francis, full of energy, maybe even dreaming of knighthood and glory.
Wow.
He even fought in battles between Assisi and Perugia.
Huh.
It's a far cry from the peace-loving saint that we know.
Totally.
Yeah.
And it's interesting how those early experiences, like his capture during that battle with Perugia, seem to have been like the seeds for his spiritual awakening.
Yeah, being confined, whether it's physically or emotionally, really forces you to look inward. And it seems like for Francis, that captivity really sparked a deep introspection, questioning everything he thought he knew.
But when he gets back to Assisi, we start to see this like gradual shift in him.
Yeah.
He's drawn to being alone and to prayer. He spends more time in contemplation. And this new piety leads him to do some pretty audacious things.
Like what?
Well, for example, his encounter with the leprous. Leprosy back then wasn't just like a physical ailment. It was like a social death sentence.
Oh, for sure. People with leprosy were totally ostracized.
Yeah.
Considered unclean and untouchable.
And yet Francis, this young man from a world of privilege, overcomes his own aversion and kisses the leper's hand.
Wow. What a powerful gesture. It really foreshadows his whole ministry, doesn't it? His embrace of the marginalized and his challenge to all those social conventions.
Yeah. It's like his heart was already attuned to the plight of the outcast.
The forgotten.
Yeah.
The rejected.
And it's in this context of spiritual exploration and growing compassion that we get to this pivotal moment in Francis's life.
His encounter with the crucifix at the Church of San Damiano.
Right, the dilapidated Church of San Damiano.
And it's there that he hears the voice of Christ urging him to rebuild my church.
This is often called Francis's conversion.
Mm-hmm.
But it wasn't just like a change of heart. It was a call to action.
He took it literally at first, right? Setting out to rebuild San Damiano with his own two hands.
He did, at first.
Mm-hmm.
But as we read Bonaventure's account, we see that Francis's understanding of rebuilding, it went way beyond just the physical structure.
So he saw the church, the body of Christ, as needing spiritual renewal as well.
Exactly.
He felt he had to address both the material and spiritual poverty around him. It's a theme that runs through his whole life, this connection between the physical and spiritual. I agree. And that's what informs his whole embrace of poverty. Francis wasn't just for material deprivation. It was about stripping away all the distractions of wealth and possessions.
To fully devote himself to God and serving others.
Yeah, exactly.
And his commitment to that ideal was radical, even shocking to people around him.
Oh, yeah. Like that famous scene in the town square where he renounces his inheritance.
And strips naked.
To show his complete detachment from worldly things.
It's almost theatrical.
It was a dramatic act, for sure, meant to show the depth of his conviction. This wasn't just rejecting his father's wealth. This was rejecting the values and aspirations of his whole life.
It was a complete break with his past, a rebirth.
Yes, and that act had a profound impact on everyone who saw it. Some scoffed, some were confused.
But some were really moved by his sincerity.
By his willingness to sacrifice everything for what he believed in.
And those are the people who became his first followers.
Yeah, these souls yearning for a more genuine faith.
Drawn to his charisma and the simplicity of his message.
At first, it was just a handful of men inspired by his example.
To live a life of poverty and service.
But their impact would be huge.
Leading to the Franciscan Order.
A mendicant order.
Characterized by poverty, simplicity, and service to the poor and marginalized.
Mendicant means begging for sustenance.
Wow.
Relying on the charity of others instead of accumulating wealth.
That's amazing. And it's fascinating how this commitment to poverty, which was born out of Francis's personal experience, became like a defining characteristic of the whole order.
It really did. It challenged the church's growing materialism and offered a radical alternative.
A way of life based on humility and service.
Rather than power and prestige.
And it resonated with so many people.
Both inside and outside the church. People were drawn to the Franciscans' authenticity, to their willingness to really live the gospel.
And that's what allowed the Franciscan Order to spread so rapidly throughout Europe.
Even with opposition and persecution, it captured people's imaginations.
It offered a glimpse of a different kind of church.
One that prioritized the poor and marginalized. A church that walked humbly with God.
Yeah. And that's a legacy that still inspires us today.
It challenges us to examine our own attachment to wealth and comfort.
And to think about how we can live a simpler life of service.
Absolutely.
So as we keep exploring St. Francis's life, I think it's important to remember this context, this foundation of radical poverty and deep compassion. That's where all of his other remarkable qualities come from.
His love for creation.
His pursuit of peace.
Even his mystical experiences.
It all flows from that.
And in the next chapters of his life, we're going to see the true depth of his spirituality. A spirituality that embraced not just humanity, but all of creation. You know, as we go deeper into Francis's life, it's clear that his embrace of poverty wasn't just a personal choice. It was a way of life. Like, it extended to his relationship with all of creation.
Yeah. In this part of his story, we see his profound love for animals.
But it wasn't just sentimentality.
Right. It wasn't just finding them cute.
It was a deep sense of kinship.
He called them his brothers and sisters.
He recognized their inherent dignity.
And that wasn't limited to the cute ones.
No. Bonaventure says that Francis had the same reverence for insects, worms, even animals that others might find repulsive.
Wow.
He saw the divine in every living thing.
It's like that story of him preaching to the birds.
Right.
Some might say it's just a legend, but I think it speaks to something much deeper.
Like what?
This idea that all of creation is interconnected, that even the smallest creatures have a role to play in God's plan.
It makes you think about our own relationship with nature.
Doesn't it?
Do we see animals just as resources or as fellow travelers?
Francis's example encourages us to see the wonder in all living things.
And to be responsible for them, to be good stewards.
And it's not just about appreciating them. It's about caring for them.
It reminds me of Pope Francis's Laudato Si.
That's about caring for our common home.
Exactly.
And Francis's love for animals. It wasn't separate from his other virtues.
It was all connected.
It was an extension of his humility, his poverty, his desire to live in harmony with everything.
He wasn't putting animals above humans.
He was recognizing that we're all part of God's family.
Right. We're not masters of creation. We're participants.
In this web of life.
You mentioned earlier how Francis's life had all these different threads that weave together.
Yeah.
I think his encounter with the Sultan during the Fifth Crusade is a great example.
It really is.
Here we see his commitment to peace, his poverty, his faith, all coming together.
People often overlook this part of his story, but it's so important.
It is.
Here's Francis in the middle of a holy war.
Crossing enemy lines.
Unarmed.
Alone.
To meet with the Sultan.
It's such a bold move.
Driven by his belief in dialogue.
Even with your enemies.
He saw the pointlessness of violence.
He believed that true peace came from understanding and respect.
And the Sultan al-Kamil?
He actually received Francis with hospitality.
They talked about theology.
Wow.
Sultan didn't convert.
But he was impressed by Francis.
By his sincerity?
By his commitment to peace.
It shows the power of humility.
And real dialogue. Francis didn't go there to conquer or convert.
He went with an open heart.
Ready to listen.
To build bridges.
It's relevant even today.
In a world full of division and mistrust.
Francis challenges us to reach out.
Across religions and cultures.
To seek common ground.
To build peace.
And it reminds us that peacemaking isn't just about big gestures.
It starts with small acts of kindness.
With listening.
With seeing the divine in everyone.
No matter their beliefs.
And as we get to the last part of Francis's life,
we come to a mystery
that has fascinated people for centuries.
The stigmata.
The wounds of Christ appearing on his body.
It's been debated and scrutinized.
But for believers,
it's proof of his union with Christ.
Of his sharing in Christ's suffering and love.
Bonaventure says the stigmata was the culmination of Francis's life of imitating Christ.
He had embraced poverty, humility, love.
He became like the crucified Christ.
It's powerful.
It shows how faith can transform us.
Not just our hearts, but our bodies.
It's also a reminder that following Christ
means sacrifice,
embracing suffering,
helping others,
giving yourself in love,
even to death.
And in this final act of self-giving,
his embrace of the stigmata,
Francis's life reaches its peak.
He becomes a living icon of Christ's love.
And his death 2 years later
wasn't an end,
but a transition
to God.
He died surrounded by his brothers,
singing hymns,
filled with joy and gratitude.
What a beautiful ending to an inspiring life.
It really is. What stands out to you?
Resonates most.
For me, it's how Francis's life embodies the gospel.
In such a radical but simple way.
He didn't get lost in theological arguments or power struggles.
He focused on the essentials.
Love of God,
Love of neighbor.
reverence for creation.
And he didn't just talk about it.
He lived it.
That's what makes him so compelling.
So relevant.
It raises an important question, though.
What's that?
What does St. Francis's life teach us about how we should live our own lives?
How can we, in our modern world, embrace even a little bit of his simplicity and love? That's a question that still speaks to people today, hundreds of years later.
I think Francis's life offers a real alternative to all the materialism and individualism we see today.
And it's not about, trying to copy him exactly.
And they're all going to become friars.
But there's something about his spirit.
The way he approached life.
It speaks to something we all
A
want.
simpler, more meaningful life.
And Francis didn't withdraw from the world. He engaged with it fully.
But differently.
He had different priorities.
He saw the divine in everyone.
In every creature.
In everything.
And that's the key to understanding why he's still so popular.
His love.
It was expansive.
Francis reminds us that holiness isn't just for a few.
It's for everyone.
It's about opening our hearts to God's love.
Then letting it flow out.
To our neighbor.
To
To
creation.
work for peace and justice.
It's realizing that our lives are not our own.
We're part of something bigger.
Connected to each other and to all creation.
We often think of St. Francis as this gentle figure surrounded by animals.
Right.
But there's another side to him.
What do you mean?
He can be pretty bold,
Oh, yeah.
even confrontational.
When it came to his values.
His gentleness wasn't weakness.
No, he had this inner strength.
That let him challenge the way things were.
In the church and in society,
Remember, he went to Rome
to confront the Pope.
about the church's materialism and corruption.
That took guts.
It shows us that true faith,
Sometimes means speaking truth to power.
even when it's hard,
Francis stood up for what he believed.
even when it was risky,
He's a model for us.
of courageous leadership.
We need leaders like that today.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the life of St. Francis, what's the one thing we should take away from his story?
I think it's love.
Love.
Francis's whole life was about love.
Love for God.
Love for others.
Love for creation.
It drove everything he did.
And it's a love that's open to all of us
It can change our lives.
and the world.
It's not some mushy feeling.
It's about action.
Some passion.
Service. Francis challenges us to move beyond ourselves,
To embrace radical love.
to see the divine in everyone,
To reach out to the forgotten.
to care for even the smallest creatures.
And for the earth.
It's a lot to ask,
But it's worth it.
because in the end,
Love is what heals us.
love brings peace.
Love leads us back to God.
So as we go from here, let's take a little bit of St. Francis with us.
His joy
Humility.
and radical love.
May his spirit guide us.
And inspire us to make a difference.